Welcome to what was supposed to be a weekly thing, where I effectively describe the lore of Cincope. For those that are actually part of the tabletop game, you may recognize the name for tonight, and those that haven't been keeping up with events going on, you probably have no idea what the heck I'm talking about. However, the title probably gives away what we're talking about. We're going to be talking about Barstone. Only recently named, but both in lore and out of lore. It wasn't always called that, and it didn't even have a name back in the Legends era. All it was a single port that had a few houses around for people that wanted to live at it. It was basically just a location of trade that spread out into the Grand Desert that at the time was known as Mortisheal. It was the receptacle of ferries and other water transports, both organic and synthetic, that would bring goods and individuals and other stuff across from the rest of the Godlands up north without them having to go actual hundreds of miles around one of a few treacherous passes through the mountains, and then after that have to freaking go from extreme cold of the mountains into extreme heat of the desert, having to somehow find a creature that was able to do that, or basically lug it yourself, which was going to be slow. The point is that it was basically, much like any other human civilization, a no-brainer to create something that was significantly easier, rather than one of the 8 ways that is a 20-step process and had a lower rate of success. It had kind of started to become what could vaguely be considered a town nearing the end of the Legends era, but that was quickly ended by the fact that due to the undead no longer having each other to keep themselves under control or actually coming to the waking world once again, the Grand Desert slowly started to have a mass exodus of people that, for obvious reasons, between the undead that would freaking pursue them up into areas that the worms couldn't, and obviously the worms that posed a natural threat as is, people just decided to leave. What was once around 10 scattered towns and cities slowly condensed itself into first only about 5 and then 3 until there was only 1. What was now starting to become the more cityized city of, still not known as Barstone, but the port. Because where there were obviously humans and the like that could just, move along and settle down in what was literally just across the... I still don't know if it's a sea, a lake. I don't know what the proper term is for that body of water. Where they could just move across and obviously just, join in on a farm that had gone along, or created their own farm in the wide swath of the land that was heavy in wheat and other grains. There were some species that weren't exactly suited for less arid environments. One of the more notable groupings was various kobold and lizardfolk species that had adapted to be akin to our horned lizards in, well, Earth. What would later become known as Barstone was effectively a last hope kind of situation for those that would either have to freaking brave the deserts and worry about a wide swath of things that could easily wind up killing them, or hope that their town could sustain itself and grow until it was actually presentable. It was extremely difficult, especially since trade had all but stopped, considering it didn't need to go out into the desert, it just kind of stayed in the desert. It stayed at the port. That was the extent of trade, and they didn't have much as far as stuff to trade back, aside from a few species of cacti and what little they could gain from the sand striders or the sandworms. And those that decided to adventure out could bring back artifacts from one of the now undead civilizations, but for obvious reasons that was quite dangerous. Even more dangerous than it was in the Legends era when they originally started. Things were slow going for quite a long time. Until one day there was a particular individual. Not a whole lot of information remains to this day, aside from what effectively became a sort of adoptive son of hers. Hey, that's me, Nasu. We'll get to me though in a little bit. She had a bit of a knack for the desert. Despite being human, she was quite well suited to the desert environment. She didn't have a problem with the heat, was able to work through most of the stuff that was needed, and eventually rose to a point where she was able to put her organizational skills to the work. And sometime later, after the mercenary guilds and the Tinkerers Guild started to migrate across in order to either do work because it had started to become a civilization, or B, in the case of the Tinkerers Guild, do research because extreme environments are good for stress testing new products. And, well, there's a lot of stuff in sand that is very useful when you're trying to make electronics and the like. Obviously not the sand itself, but several of the minerals in the sand. This had started to cause things to grow a little bit further. And with the Mercenaries Guild, they were able to fend off better against the undead hordes that were coming along, and any expeditionaries or adventurers or researchers that wanted to delve into the long-lost undead towns and kingdoms lost below the sands now actually had an option aside from learn how to fend for yourself and hope that you don't get swamped. Hey, that's how I got involved. But with the ability to push those back, there was also now the opportunity to actually start, setting up defenses. Large walls were able to be erected in order to protect even further against if the sandworms had decided to come along, because where they're able to go through sand quite well, hard stone is not exactly something that they're easily able to go through. Thankfully, no one's found out how to freaking summon one of the worms from the Southern Isles. And with the Tinkerers involved in the town, they were able to set up automated defenses, though it didn't require half of everyone involved to permanently be set on watch on the outside. So they were able to actually start cultivating stuff and investing in stuff. Particular things were able to happen. with them being so close to the water, despite being in the desert, specific semi-aquatic races were able to join in. And those from temperate lands were also joining in, now that things weren't restricted to adobe huts and sandstone, and they were able to actually work with glass and metal and piping in water for the aquatic races to actually be able to work around. It became, at the same time, the last bastion in the Grand Desert, and a bit of an anomaly. Aquatic races in a desert? Several races that were outright isolationists normally would join in, which was quite helpful in a lot of cases because they either had particular medicines that required deep depths to go into, or had a unique way of looking at things. Things started to kind of look up. And where things were still a bit slow going, things were moving much, much more smoothly and faster than they were for the previous couple hundred years, now that focus was able to be actually put to thriving rather than just surviving. Eventually, yours truly adventured down there from the cold northern locations and my hometown, and seeking money and glory, in my naive youth, decided to join the Mercenaries Guild and hunt after the large creatures that had started to call the desert their home over the past couple hundred years. It didn't go well. Smaller creatures were fine at the time, but eventually I bit off more than I could chew, and then it bit off everything it could chew. And I lost my legs. Thankfully, I was lucky enough to be found by one of the many other expedition parties that was doing research on their way back. They brought me up and freaking bound my thin stumps, and took me back. I was then given my now iconic cybernetic augmentations, as well as a few others that many don't know about. Hidden below this unassuming poofy jacket, but that's a story for another time. I was then brought under the wing of who had become at the time effectively a governor of the region, for the sake of her remaining more of a legend than a defined being. I'll not describe too much, but she did take me under her wing as effectively a mother figure, and kept me humble and avoided in the region where I could avoid having a repeat incident. Less limbs that I have to freaking get replaced, and less time in surgery. She was at quite advanced age by the time that I had gotten there, and though she had a massive impact upon my life, she did unfortunately wind up passing a few years later. The assumed age of approximately 118. Very long lived for a human that had not been augmented in any way, shape, or form. And arguably still alive to this day, considering the fact that her impact continues to leave the town that she named Barstone after what was apparently her original hometown in whatever realm she originally came from. It still remains to this day as the only bastion still standing. Quite a remarkable thing from such humble beginnings, and quite an interesting array of wildlife that you would not expect from a desert. From the expected sand striders that have since been tamed, and even one belonging to yours truly, to the Cincopian phoenixes that, well, enjoy their time around. Monochromatic vest bears of the eastern lands brought in a specific request by her for some reason. And Draco Cetacea. Not actually any form of cetacean or any form of dragon, but some sort of creature that somehow mimics both. The aforementioned organic transport across the Great Sea. The micro sea, I guess. And it can even be seen from across the way due to the large buildings, due to the multiple aquatic races that have created themselves large pillars that contain water for them to actually work with, and also, with the help of the Tinkerers, electronics that don't exactly just short out in water. The Tinkerers with their own tower. A small area means that you have to build tall rather than build wide, especially since that means that you have to worry less about using all of your resources on a wall in order to protect it against all the dangers of the desert. And one other tower that not many that aren't native to the desert know what it's for. I suppose it appears more as a fortress than a tower. It is, in truth, a stable. The sand striders aren't exactly small creatures, and they also need a place to stay and stay safe because they are one of the chief food sources of the larger the worm species. And outside this now city, not far away, is where a particular portal opened up. In the exact same spot as where the mysterious woman had appeared from all that time ago. This portal had a strange level of stability, and I was called upon to adventure through that. That is a story for another day. Or if you want to keep up to date on that story, you can join the Discord or follow the Twitter or various other socials that are in the card below in order to keep up with the exploration series, especially with the next 2 months having a very special grouping. Especially in December. A conclusion of the first arc to a certain degree. But that is all for the story of Barstone thus far. What was once merely a port became the only standing jewel amongst a sea of yellow despair. And this is Nasu of the future saying thank you all so much for watching. Like if you liked, subscribe to become part of the Phoenix Brotherhood, and I'm sorry that things have not exactly been uploading as of recent. I haven't been doing a lot of things as of recent aside from art and working on the exploration series. But I have another thing that is going to come up very, very soon once I get it edited as well. But thank you all so much for your support and your patience. And before I go rambling, thank you all again. Bye!